Well, the first time the three of us were together in person was in Oslo, and that's, I think, roughly 2 years ago. Um, and that was really at the very early stages, right? We were kind of, Tinnitus Quest didn't even formally exist because the legal entity was formed in July 2024. So we were kind of fantasizing, brainstorming, thinking about what could be, what could we achieve, and now we are here in Copenhagen. And Sven, how would you reflect on the past 2 years?
Oof, it was a wild journey. I think well, how it how it always ends up. If you make a plan, nothing will work out the way you have planned it. And I think but in general, our main idea, how we want to create Tinnitus Quest and how we want to evolve Tinnitus Quest, um, I think turned out to be true. I think we were hitting the right spot for the tinnitus community. I think we really did our best to find a common ground that uh, includes the science, the patient community, and let's say it as it is, the marketing around it. And I think we learned a lot of stuff. We tried out things. Some things didn't work out the way we liked it. I think a big step for us was our grants program and creating the design of the grants program. And I think we learned so much out of the first design of the grants program that this will now keep on developing. And I think I'm just super proud how this idea under the shower developed into a little but multinational NGO to this point.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, you said plans never work out the way you think, right? Is there sort of one thing that surprised you or that you didn't expect that happened?
I think I don't think it's the one thing. I think in the beginning, when we were fantasizing about potential celebrities that would support us, I don't think I would have ended up saying that William Shatner would be would be let's say a part of Tinnitus Quest. I think that was a big thing. I thought we have to start, let's say, way more simple and work our way up. And I think that was one big thing. And I think it's still a tough, it's tough circumstances where you try to get people involved, and it's still, as you have very often talked about it, a stigma in the industry not to talk about it. But yeah, I think that was the one big thing, and then the second was I think I underestimated all the legal challenges also ahead of us. From starting accounting. Setting up the legal entity that we decided to be in Germany. In the end, we ended up having now two entities in the US and in Germany. And this, always adds up to so many things. And I think especially you, Hazel.
The admin burden is less fun, yeah, but I don't think our audience would be very interested in me describing what that looks like. But it's less fun and it takes up always more time than you think. Yeah.
Yeah.
What surprised you, Jack? Or
what surprised me is the speed that we've gone at. You mentioned that we were in Oslo 2 years ago, and I'm thinking, well, where are we going to be in 2 years' time? Because if you think about what we've achieved, a group of people, a handful of people, what we've achieved in 2 years, to me, in my mind, is incredible. Incredibly proud of it. It's not been easy, like you said, the admin, the work, the struggles with getting people to talk, but I think it's been an incredible journey, personally, to be part of this. And I think we've achieved things very, very quickly. And that gives me sort of hope for what we can achieve in the next 2 years.
I think the dedication of the people was crazy in this project. I mean, it's not just you, Hazel. It's also Marku, and everybody who supported us. And sorry to add one thing that surprised me. I think how our board structure developed. From who were the first ones supporting us, then how new people came in, how everything shaped so quickly, and then you learn that maybe the one person is not so dedicated to the mission as we thought they would be. Somebody else comes up, and that is, I think, was also a very interesting development.
I mean, getting the right people is always so crucial, right? I remember, Sven, you talked at the beginning about that's sort of your talent as a businessman. It's always about getting the right people together, and I think you sort of saw that at the beginning. And you have to be lucky to an extent as well, but that worked out really well. I think we were lucky as well, to find the right people.
Yeah, I definitely think there was an element of luck in this, because you just don't know, do you, until you sort of, you start working with it.
Yeah, absolutely. But you can enforce luck, as I always say, it's possible.
Exactly.
And okay, with Marco and Hazel already knew that, they had a lot of competence in the field. I mean, but, always when you start a project like that and you start talking to people, in my experience, also business-wise, always something good comes up.
Yeah.
Of course, you have to speak to a lot of people. If you don't, if you just speak to a very small amount of people, the chances that you get the right one is quite low. But if you start speaking to so many people as we did, or being on so many podcasts and platforms and whatever it was, I think turned out to be the right strategy.
I mean, that's 100%. Like, Jack has to talk to probably 10 people before we get one video interview, right? I'm just making up the number 10, but there's a lot of conversations before you get a specific output. Like, I'm doing a lot of fundraising. You probably have to have 10 conversations before someone like writes you a bigger check, right? So,
And that's a good ratio.
yeah, then that's probably a good ratio. Yeah, we get all the time people wanting to volunteer, and actually most of the time put into Tinnitus Quest is volunteer time, and then it's the same thing. I talk to volunteers all the time, and they're super enthusiastic, but probably 1 in 10 works out because people have life circumstances, other things going on, whatever, right? So it is that ratio. It's a lot of work behind the scenes to sort of get the success that you want. Anyway, let's talk a bit about the tinnitus community, because I think that's sort of, from the very beginning, everything we've done has sort of been rooted in the patient community, right? Even the very fact that Tinnitus Quest was founded by tinnitus sufferers, I think, is already unique. Most patient organizations aren't necessarily run by patients. I think that's already an advantage that we have. And of course, Marco and I were for years running tinnitus talks, so we're always like had our ear to the ground, what patients want, and heard all the frustration for years and years. And how did you come into this, Sven? Like, for sure, you've suffered from tinnitus since age 15. You probably had your own frustrations about what was happening or not happening, and probably listening to other people as well. Like, why is it so important for this to you that we are patient driven?
Well, I think it's the most important thing about tinnitus and tinnitus research, as I always say, is the hope. But hope is something you can influence, and it's something you can start to create. And as most tinnitus patients around the world experience a contact to a physician or an ENT or whoever it is, an audiologist, and mostly with the answer that nothing can be done, is something that is super critical to this condition. It's almost, I don't know of any condition that is so widespread around the world, so considered a World Health problem, where this answer is the only answer you're getting. So that is insane. So I think it was very important to create Tinnitus Quest as the light at the end of the tunnel, where people can refer to, where people get the information that they want, but not being a classic patient organization like they already exist in different countries, or such as German Tinnitus League, or even ATA and so on. And I think to focus on what matters the most, in the end, the research was the right thing to do. And I think we try to balance that out over time. Sometimes we were more focused on research in our daily doing, sometimes, creating more the patient perspective, such as the videos and all social media campaigns and so on. But yeah, in the end, it has become also an NGO business operation, which is the reality. I mean, we're doing this to collect money, and to spend that money on high impact research, to find a solution. And then also, what was super intense and interesting is to work or not work with other organizations and see how that landscape is working. And I think what we can proudly say is that Tinnitus Quest for sure reshaped that landscape a bit.
I think from us starting being patients, it was key because there's been so much, how can I put it, disbelief. There's been so much people sort of being scammed, and there's been so much worry that a new organization might not be legitimate. Whereas we're coming from it saying that we're in this with you because we're patients. So I think that's been key. It's been key with talking to, outreach, trying to get patients and trying to get people, artists to talk, because often they'd say, I know you know what I'm talking about, because they know that we're tinnitus patients. So I think it's been key because it's given us legitimacy, which is, it's an ongoing battle that we still face. We know that. But for me to be able to talk to people knowing that we can relate to each other has been, a big thing for me, trying to get people to talk. So something that I personally feel doesn't get spoken about much, and I'm not quite sure why, is the mental health aspect that comes with tinnitus. So we have various degrees of tinnitus, we know that, but there's also a large spectrum of people that have severe tinnitus, and that brings with it mental health issues, sleep disturbances, all that sort of stuff. So 45% of people with tinnitus experience clinical depression, anxiety. 50 to 70% of tinnitus patients report sleep disturbances, and that brings a whole world of, fragility, and can, wreck your mental health. You put on top of that it's an invisible condition. You put on top of that when you go to the doctors, they tell you to just get on with it. You're putting all this mental stress on yourself, and no one can understand you. And I feel that the mental health aspect of severe tinnitus is something that is just not spoken about enough. And the reason why I say this is because when you do these interviews and you get these people talk to you about how it's affected them, and you put it together with what's available to them, there's a massive disconnect. There's so many things to me that don't make sense in tinnitus. Like, this whole world does not make sense. It's just not logical in any way. So that's something that I feel is something that we brought out with Tinnitus Quest. With the interviews, sharing stories, sharing real stories, I think the mental health aspect has really been a big thing for us.
I'll give you another statistic, actually. So, like I said, Marco and I have been running the Tinnitus Talk Support Forum for many years. Marco much longer. He started it in 2011. We've used it also to gather data from the community, and some of that data has been, turned into academic papers, etc. But there's a survey statistic that I don't think we ever published it, but we asked people, have you ever had suicidal thoughts because of your tinnitus? And 30% answered yes. And that's a very scary statistic. okay, now we must realize that this is not a random sample of people with tinnitus. This is a sample of people with tinnitus who are distressed enough about it to go online and seek help from others, right? Still, that is a scary statistic. And I remember even like back then, years ago, when I got involved, and we would have conversations with other tinnitus organizations, and I won't name them because I'm going to criticize them now a bit as well. But we would bring up statistics like this, and they would say, "Well, but we can't talk about that because we would be scaremongering, right? We'd be making people afraid that that they're going to end up like that and they can't get better and they can't habituate." I'm like, but how can we sweep that under the rug as well, right? I mean, we should be talking about that. And there's always this tension where in the more like traditional organizations, we're like, no, we're not going to talk about that because, it was kind of to me, it felt patronizing in a way. It's like, well, we have to protect people from scary messages, so we're not going to put out scary messages. And that always frustrated me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the problem is with that, again, there's the whole world of tinnitus is upside down. It's lopsided. It makes no sense to me because if you do that, if you keep saying, no, don't talk about that, don't talk about that. So what happens is that tinnitus remains classified as a minor problem because nobody's talking about suicide. Nobody's talking about clinical depression, 45%, etc. All those figures I just mentioned. If we're not talking about it, it remains that little noise in your head that the doctor tells you to get on with. Now, of course, talking about suicide is, we've had this come up in our interviews. And when you are interviewing someone who is telling you, a young person is telling you that they have been suicidal, it affects you because, it just does. How can it not? But again, as I'm hearing this and I'm interviewing this person, I'm like, okay, this is what this person's data is. And then I go online and see what the data is regarding general tinnitus, and I'll cope with it. And coping strategies have their role. Of course they do. We need coping strategies, right? We need to learn how to deal with it. But there's a disconnect in my mind. You've got these people severely struggling, but yet, man, we can talk about the funding and we can talk about the research of the funding, the way, but it's like, it makes no sense to me.
Yeah, but I would like to put that a little bit in perspective because I wouldn't say that the research community in the past 10 years has not spoken enough about that. I think there have been great samples of studies where all comorbidities of tinnitus have been at least looked at very much in detail. But the reality is, on the one side, those studies, and on the other side, the average ENT or the average physician you will meet as a tinnitus patient first time. So, of course, those physicians, and of course we know, and that's the same thing as the sample that you just mentioned from Tinnitus Talk, is we all know those first cycles that is a devil's spiral when you're a first-time tinnitus patient, and and your tinnitus comes into a chronic phase. Then, of course, there is an amount of patients that is able to adapt to that, and of course, like probably that's the same with any chronic disease, not just tinnitus, whatever it is. Pain is the same thing. If you would ask the same questions in a pain forum, and you would ask, have you had suicidal thoughts because of your pain? Then, of course, a large amount would say probably yes. Depends on the amount of pain, and pain is relative, as is tinnitus. So I think the problem is not the research that has been done, and I think there has been a solid research on comorbidities today.
I agree.
I think everybody knows that today, at least in the top tinnitus centers around the world, and there in the meantime there have been a few, that if a patient has a clinical depression, we treat the depression first. If he has anxiety, we'll treat the anxiety first, because I think that's the normal thing to do. But as I say, the problem is the average physician or ENT, a tinnitus patient will face probably around the world as a first contact. And I think of course, handling those kind of things for those physicians at such a multi-morbid condition is super difficult for them.
Yeah.
No, how the medical profession deals with tinnitus patients is one thing, but I feel like Jack and I were talking more about the public debate around tinnitus, right?
So, sorry to interrupt you.
Go ahead.
But I just want to clarify that because I understand what you're saying. What I was saying is that from the hackathon, we can talk about the hackathon afterwards because I think it's amazing. It was amazing to be there. And I want to talk about that. But what I was referring to more is that with tinnitus patients, you add one more person who is not a tinnitus patient. They're like, oh, is it like I was at a dinner party on Friday? So what is it? Is it like a sound? That's what I mean. It's treated as a minor problem in terms of general perception and funding. And we know about
it.
That's what I'm talking about. Because when you get these people say these amazingly powerful things, and then you go and do the research, you're like, this ain't making sense. I got a figure that I want to drop. I'm dropping figures today because I did a bit of research so that I can look smart. The global cost, the annual global cost. Do you know what the global cost is? The annual global cost combined of tinnitus. Have a guess.
That's a high number.
It's billions.
It's into the billions.
Yeah.
But it is, as I say, there's one smart thing somebody said once about tinnitus and why it's still not, even though it's a world health issue. It's one of the big world health issues next to also hearing disorders. No, so it's not just tinnitus for itself, but it's also hearing disorders. And the reason is it doesn't kill you.
Yeah.
That is the simple reason. That is the simple reason.
Yeah.
If cancer would be super painful but not killing you in the end, it would have been treated differently. But that is the reality.
Yeah. So,
and this is why it's still on such a low ball situation.
I would say that's part of the explanation, but not the full one. If you think about you just mentioned chronic pain. Chronic pain doesn't kill you either. Usually people have chronic pain long after the original injury is resolved. That's what chronic pain is. It's like the centralization of the pain signal when there's actually nothing wrong physiologically, right? Yet people suffer immensely. The funding and attention that goes into that is many, many multiples, if not, maybe a dozen times more than tinnitus. And I think it's because everyone knows what pain is.
Yeah.
Everyone has once had a bad injury or an incident where they experienced extreme pain and can relate to that, right? I think that's the difference.
And there is a whole field in medicine that is only looking at pain as an anesthesiologist in the end, of course, doing anesthesia is in the end is taking away pain or possible pain from you. So a whole field of medicine is only looking at pain or preventing pain.
Yeah.
And even though it's still a complicated question in many cases, but I think the big difference also is that if you come to a doctor and you say you're having pain, he's got a variety of possibilities to treat you from the first second. He will never tell you, just get used to your pain and go. Of course, he will try first with, I don't know, whatever it is, physiotherapy or ibuprofen or something, something so pretty easy. But then he's got the full scale of up to an opiate to shoot you to the moon, basically. So, and I think that is the very, very big difference. It's the difference how the patient perceives the situation and also what the market, that's the reality too, for the pharma companies is.
Yeah, and I think that's circling back to where we started with this. The global annual cost of tinnitus is $200 billion, estimated as $200 billion per year. If you imagine that as a swimming pool, an Olympic-sized swimming pool, the amount of money that gets put into research every year would be a glass of water. So financially, it's a massive number. So little is being put into funding it. Again, it just doesn't make sense from a financial point of view.
Yeah, I mean, if we would, start solving problems on this planet on the basis of that calculation, I think we would be far more ahead on many things.
Yeah.
But the reality is that in the end a problem for the market? I mean, we're talking about two things. The costs you're just you're giving are partially costs to the economy or to the social systems or to society. So that's always a relative cost. I mean, we can say that all over again. You won't feel if it's $1 billion more or less in your pocket. So that's the reality. The reality is how can we motivate researchers and then ultimately companies to get into this field. And I think the motivation in general is on the one side quite low because the approach is so complex, but on the other side quite high because the patient base is huge, and it's a very sustainable patient base. So what's the highest risk factor in tinnitus? It's age. So societies are getting older. So this will be a very sustainable patient base. So in the end, I think those are the big questions. And I think, to be honest, this community hasn't done a great job over the last 20, 30 years in pushing the topic. I mean, look at other conditions, look at mental health issues. I mean, nobody talked about mental health issues 20, 30 years ago. You didn't say, oh, my uncle has a depression. Somebody said, he's crazy. Or something like that. It was very blunt, very bold. I mean, it wasn't seen as something that you talk a lot about, and a couple of smart people, whoever they were, congratulations, you turned around the whole view society has on that problem.
I just want to jump in there, Sven, because
Sure.
I think that I agree with you. I agree that if we're going to tackle this, the tinnitus community as a whole has got to internalize that it starts with them. But I also want to put a caveat on that. I don't think the tinnitus community has had the opportunity that Tinnitus Quest is giving it. And here's what I mean. We are now getting people coming to us saying, I want to share my story. I want to tell you everything about my life and my struggle. That's a lot for a patient to do. That takes a lot. To go on camera with a guy that you've never met before, you have no relationship to this guy, and start crying and say, I've had people say that tinnitus has been the principal cause for breaking up their marriage. I've had people say it drove them to drink. On record. I've had people say, as we know, that they've been clinically depressed and suicidal. It takes a lot for a person to do that to a stranger. So I don't think they've had the opportunity that Tinnitus Quest is giving them. And I'm grateful that we're giving them this opportunity. But I also strongly feel that we've got to get the message across even stronger. It starts with them. We get emails all the time saying, email that famous person. Get on the phone to that famous person. And my reaction is, I'm like, okay, hold on, let me think about it. So let me just think about this. You want to go and talk to this guy who's got a multi-million-dollar enterprise around him. Dozens of people that rely on him or her for a living. A career that he's built up over 20, 30 years. She's built up over 20, 30 years. And you want them to come to a new organization and share their story, but you won't share yours. And people go, well, what Jim be talking about? what have I got? Did they reach millions? And my feeling on this is, if we want to change things, it starts with us. Patient after patient, patient 1, patient 2, patient 3, till we get to patient 1,000. And then you go to these people and they see a whole grassroots groundswell.
So, Jack, I do want to hear more from you about the stories that you've heard, because you've spoken to so many people now. Or is there a specific story that affected you, or is there a theme that sort of stands out from all these conversations?
All of them have affected me because I'm constantly sort of, tuning into their emotion, and I sort of, they've all affected me. And I hate to say it, but the more people are honest with me, the more I'm grateful for that video, because we've got to show the real face of tinnitus. I've been, dealing with tinnitus for 23 years, and I always thought it was just me. I always thought it was like, is it me? Is it just my mental weakness? Am I sort of my anxiety, whatever? But the more stories I hear and record, the more I think this is a problem that is ridiculous. It's such a problem. And, every video for me is a win. So in terms of stories, I've spoken to other musicians. They've told me that it's wrecked their careers, it's wrecked their mental health, it's changed the way that they've had to create. I've spoke to people, and again, this is something that, going back to the mental health aspect, people struggle more with mental health from my experience than they do with the actual sound themselves, the actual sound itself. What does that mean? The sound is the sound, but people are struggling with going out to get a loaf of bread because they might hear a child scream, going out to a dinner party. And then if they don't go to the dinner party, they shut down their life. They don't socialize. And if they don't socialize, they're not being mentally fed. All these things that we don't think about. When I go to a dinner party, I'm worried about how much noise is going to be there. All this mental cost that it takes from people is not fully aware. When you say to someone, I've got tinnitus, they go, oh, is it the sound in your head? I'm like, yeah, it's the sound in my head, but there's a whole backdrop to that I can't explain to you because...
So how do you explain it? Because we just talked about how chronic pain is different because everyone knows what pain is, right? But not everyone knows the experience of living with tinnitus. So how do you convey that?
That's a good question. Because I don't think the people who don't have tinnitus can fully grasp what we're talking about. It's inside our head. And it's not just inside our head. You're taking away everything, all the possibilities, because just going out in a sort of a sensory world, there's noise everywhere. Me coming on the plane here, going through the airport, it's a big problem. And that's why stories is so important. And that's why it goes back to what I was saying. The tinnitus community has got to internalize. We've got to make our voice count. That's the key.
Yep. Let's talk a bit about the message that we're putting out versus the message that people living with tinnitus may hear through other channels. So I'll give you an example. So there's been more media attention towards tinnitus in the past few years. That's a good thing. But I notice a pattern whenever there's a media article about tinnitus. It will start with, usually they interview someone and say, Christine lives with tinnitus and she struggled a lot and it's affected her so much. But then it always ends with, oh, but Christine learned to live with it and now she's fine. And, if you have tinnitus, you shouldn't worry too much because there's lots of tools and things you can do to help yourself and you're going to be fine, right? So there's this compulsion to end on this positive note rather than to say, no, actually, this is an urgent problem and we need to put a lot more money into research, And I always feel it's such a missed opportunity and it frustrates me. And I will, I hate to, I don't want to bash anyone, but I am frustrated with the traditional tinnitus and hearing organizations. And in fact, we wouldn't have founded Tinnitus Quest if we didn't all feel that frustration, right? Because what happens when a journalist writes an article about tinnitus, they will go to one of the traditional organizations because they'll do a quick Google and they'll find one of them that have been around for dozens of years, and that's the one they'll interview. And those organizations fail to grasp the opportunity to then put out a message through this journalist that this is really urgent and we need to put a lot more money into research and we need better treatments and better solutions. And instead, they'll put out this kind of wishy-washy message about, yeah, it can be really bad, but, most people learn to live with it, blah, blah, blah. And that just frustrates me.
Can I be honest with you? I feel firstly, I understand the dilemma. The dilemma is we've got to share coping techniques because we have to. It's a moral obligation to help people, right? We're all good people. We want to help. So we share coping techniques. But I feel, if I'm honest with you, that we've become entrenched in the idea that there's never going to be a cure.
Yeah.
So they share these coping techniques and it's done with in good faith. And I appreciate that. I've benefited from them. But it's almost like if we take 100% of what we do, not we, Tinnitus Quest, of, people that help in this area, 100%, 95% would be coping techniques. And then a tagline at the end, we're a little bit into research because we're sort of looking at research. Surely it should be the other way around. And I understand the dilemma because they have to, but I feel that it's entrenched that there's no cure. Let's not talk about a cure because it's too complicated. Let's just pretend, or let's just, that's how I feel.
Yeah, but we have to be very honest there. That was the beginning in every major disease that physicians or scientists started doing research on. I mean, that is the same today for glioblastoma, for a certain brain tumor. That, everything starts at some point. And of course, we can't talk about a cure, and I'm not sure. I'm 100% sure that there will be a cure, because there's a solution to that. And a very similar story is if you look at the French researcher that got the Nobel Prize shared Nobel Prize for the development of mRNA. I mean, just read her story. I mean, she was basically dismissed from universities because her approach did not work. In the beginning, everything they tried with mRNA, people died or people got severe side effects because they couldn't handle the immune system reacting to that. And then she kept on working on it. And she found a common ground at the company today world known as BioNTech. And this is where she found a home ground to keep on with her research. And, in the end, it turned out to be probably the sharpest sword we will have against a lot of different cancers in the next years. And I think this will turn around or reshape the whole health landscape, what will happen there in the next years. Of course, it starts somewhere. And whatever the trigger point was to start, maybe it was Tinnitus Quest now. And that's what we're working for. And of course, we need a little bit of luck. And we always need a little bit of luck. We need we need consistent hard work on it. It's not something where we, just play around and put some bets on and hopefully that never wins any championship. There's a very nice saying, and I'm not into American football, but this is really true. It's actually for the English football the same. It's defense wins championships. That is a very good, and that means that you have to be very persistent and very strong, always working towards one point at the same time and penetrate it many times before being able to succeed. And that's the same. It's the same in our case.
Well, you came into this from the beginning, Sven, with this strong message of a belief in scientific progress. Scientific progress is always possible. Every problem has a solution. and we just need to push hard enough to find it. And I think that has informed our narrative from the beginning, where we're not afraid to talk about how bad the problem is and talk about things like mental health and suicide. But it's a positive message because we believe there's a solution as well. So we're not just sending out a scary message of, oh, tinnitus is so bad. We're sending out a hopeful message of, this is a very difficult and complex problem, but it can be solved. And we need to all put our full attention towards solving it.
Yeah, because I hate it so much that in general, I mean, in my professional life, if I have a meeting with either my team or even with third persons, then I just hate it if somebody only speaks about problems. I mean, what I mean, it doesn't give me anything. It doesn't give him anything. So if you want to, if you really want to change something, then put out the problem, describe the problem, but start to describe possible solutions. It doesn't matter if they're wrong or right, but just by starting to discuss solutions, this is where you will get people together, and maybe you don't have the 100% answer, but maybe you're at 40%. The next one will say, oh, that's right. I have an idea to add to that. And this is how avalanches are developing. The beginning of an avalanche is one stone. And this, and I think this is what we're not trying, but this is what we're doing.
Couple of things. I think we're giving hope by creating a community. So yes, we put out a stark message. We don't deal in coping techniques and stuff like that. But I think, and I don't just think it, I see it. And I've had people say, I'm so glad that I found this page. I'm so glad I found Tinnitus Quest. I finally have a sense of hope, a realistic sense of hope. Number two, I like that we don't mix our messaging. I like that we don't mix it. I like that we're all about, this is what we want, and this is what we're trying to do to get that. And that's better treatments towards a cure. So I think these things are important. And the last thing I want to say on this particular point is that I'm currently reading a book called A Short History on Nearly Everything by Bill Bryson.
Mm-hmm.
Every page is about a researcher, an inventor, a scientist failing. Some of these guys failed for 10, 15 years, and they never actually achieved what they wanted. But then someone else would come along, take that research, and make the breakthrough. It took perseverance, determination, and passion to create this scientific world that we all live in. And I think that's where Tinnitus Quest is. We are forging through despite all the negativity and all the, problems of legitimacy, the lack of funding. And I feel if we don't do it, who else is going to do it? That's why I feel passionate about what we're doing. Okay, so this is a hot one. We can cut there.
Yes.
Why is Big Pharma hesitant to get involved consistently?
It's actually not such a complicated question. It's, just from today's perspective, if you would be the CEO of a big pharma company and your VP called Hazel would come to you and say, I've got a great idea. We need to get into tinnitus. You say, tinnitus, okay. And then she will provide you with the numbers and will tell you 800 people around the globe have tinnitus. And he says, 800 million? What are they doing the whole day? Then she will say something like, well, most of them cope with it, and it's actually not a problem for them. And then there is an amount of, let's say, 250 million struggling with it. Okay, 250 million is still a high number. And so you get on with that, and then you will ask, the one critical question is, how can we approach that? And this is where the whole story will end, because Hazel will have to say, well, at the moment, there's just no, in terms of, we're talking about pharmacology. So she can say something like, well, lidocaine has worked, but well, the side effects are so severe that people could have died. So and all of that, and so in the end, a lot of basic research has to be done, and that's something pharma is not so interested about. The basic research, at least in Europe, in the US it's a bit different, but in Europe, is done by, state academic institutions, the universities, the big societies in Germany like Fraunhofer, Helmholtz, and whoever, what their name is, and you have equal ones in France and the Netherlands and so on. So this is where mostly the basic research starts. And as soon as there is a hint that something could work out, then most jump into it. And then the next thing that prevents, and that is one of the number one causes that pharma is taking a step at, is as soon as you would be in that conversation a bit further, you would ask, how can we measure the success? And then we're again at the end of the story, because there is no objective measurement in tinnitus. It just doesn't exist. And you're the best example, and I'm the best example. You're saying you have a severe tinnitus. What does that mean? How can we, that is, if we would develop a drug that as the potential outcome has only tinnitus gone or tinnitus is still there, then of course, okay. But, will a drug influence that your tinnitus gets better as long as you take the drug? Or is it, just a one-time pill or whatever it is? So that is a very, very complicated, it's an easy answer to a very complicated question, is that at the moment the basic research is not far enough for pharmacology, I think, for the companies to jump on. I mean, there are companies, mostly, venture capital financed. And the second thing is the measurement. It's very hard for a company to invest into a drug to, come out and don't have a very solid objective measurement scheme. Did it work or did it not work? And that's particularly important in tinnitus in general, because tinnitus, now I'm missing the word, the bias factor, in the study, I'm missing the no, not the biomarker, the placebo, sorry, the placebo effect, sorry, I missed out the word. The placebo effect is so super strong. And as soon as a placebo effect is so strong in a condition, then it gets even more important that we can objectively measure the outcome of in any trial imaginable. So this is, I think, the let's say the easy answer to this situation.
Yeah, so I totally agree. I think it's important that people understand sort of the what the research pipeline looks like for new medical solutions and innovations. And what a lot of people don't know is, like Sven just described, that it's usually academia actually that comes up with the major new breakthroughs and insights, because the risk reward system in academia is such that you get rewarded through, you gain status in your career through making major new breakthroughs and coming up with insights that don't necessarily yet have like a commercial angle.
Yeah.
Right? But in obviously in the commercial world, there's different risk reward systems where it's only interesting for a commercial company to pick up something if there is already a solution of sorts that they can then develop and bring to market. So they're interested in commercializing existing solutions. But if there is no solution, if there is nothing to commercialize, then so that's what we're trying to do with Tinnitus Quest, is to accelerate that pipeline and specifically fund sort of those translational studies where you're translating insights from basic science into actual treatments. And that's where traditional funding is very slow and conservative, right? And that's why you're seeing a lot of tinnitus studies that just kind of rehash stuff that's already been tried. Let's do another study for CBT, or let's again try transcranial magnetic stimulation or whatever, because that's how traditional funding for academia kind of, that's the incentives they provide, particularly for tinnitus, because, it's, there's so much we don't know yet. And so that's where we're trying to fill in that missing link. Let's fund studies in academia that really try something new and different. And then if they identify an actual potential solution, then we need industry to pick it up. And that's also when it becomes a lot more expensive, because the kind of studies we fund are actually not that expensive. There's just very little appetite from anyone to fund them. But the expensive part is usually once you make a discovery of, hey, this treatment might actually work, then it takes hundreds of millions to get it to market, and you need industry to jump in.
And it still doesn't mean it works.
Yeah.
This is also a very dangerous way to approach that, is by, very often in science you had very small trials in the beginning that turned out, to be amazing.
Yeah.
And then you put it in large scale,
There's no
and
guarantee
there's no
for that.
guarantee.
Yeah.
So, but this is, well, in the end, this is how science works. I mean, this will never change. Whoever, debates against science around the world. I know this development, come up once in a while. We had that huge debate within Corona. I'm not going to get into that. But, in the end, if somebody gets sick for whatever reason and on whatever condition, he always yells for the doctor and yells for a solution. And this solution is provided by science, and science works the same. The lucky situation for our generation that we live in is the acceleration through, IT and of course AI and stuff like that. I think that will accelerate everything. I think everybody gets the feeling at the moment, that at least my feeling, that at the moment medical research in general is accelerating at a fast pace. Because the opportunities have grown. Just as an example, just cancer. I mean, 20 years ago, if you had cancer, there were three options: radiation therapy, chemotherapy, surgery. Those were the three things for a long, long time. Those were the three options that were available. Sometimes worked out, sometimes it didn't. And that was it. If there was a tumor not reacting to one of those three, or was not, there was no chance of surgery, then it was your death sentence. So now we have way more options, and I think that's the same also in hearing research. I think I have maybe just my Instagram algorithm got fucked up with all the hearing stuff. But I see in general, I see much more hearing research. And I think we are lucky to be in a generation where all this is accelerating. And I just think Tinnitus Quest is just being a part of accelerating that.
Yeah, so I'd actually like to play devil's advocate a bit, because there's a question we very often get through email and social media. And that's, well, why can't you just help like those solutions that have already been developed? So for instance, a lot of people ask, why can't you help Susan Shore get her treatment to market? Thanos Tsanopoulos, those two, by the way, are on our scientific advisory board, and we know these people very well. Hamid Jalilian is on our executive board, and he's working on an electrical stimulation device for the inner ear. Why can't we just help them get these? Why are we soliciting new ideas? Why can't we just help people get these solutions to market?
I can answer that. That's it's pretty easy. So, well, first of all, between those three and the status of their development is a difference. Hamid's work is still ongoing, and I think Hamid is a very good example because he collected a good amount of private money to actually start this project. So he did that before Tinnitus Quest existed, and I think he has done a great job on that. So in the end, that's an ongoing project where Tinnitus Quest didn't even exist. With Susan Shore, I think it's a different situation. I mean, at the moment they try to commercialize the product. I think it's something that has a valid perspective. But I mean to bring it to market, we are at the same point you just described.
Yeah.
We are at the point where we now need investors or a company to take a huge risk. Well, huge risk, but a risk to commercialize a product like that. And now, what is the reality on that market? Even though those two systems have nothing in common, we saw Linear pushing to market at hyper speed in terms of development in tinnitus and medical devices with hyper speed. And I don't think that the story turned out to be so successful as it sometimes appears. So people who are really into the topic see that. So they will ask the studies that are needed to bring the Susan Shore device to market be much more intense, much more detailed. And then we come to the point that I turned out at the beginning is, where is the objective measurement? Yeah. So, okay, loudness measurement. We already know that the FDA does not accept loudness reduction as one of their key performance indicators. They will still go back on the tinnitus questionnaire. So, this is where, things get a little complicated, and there is no easy answer to that. So, but just to give you a perspective, why we are not getting into that, because that's not our mission. That has nothing to do with our mission. Those things exist. They or at least they're close to being realized from a scientific perspective. Tinnitus Quest is not a venture capitalist investing into new medical devices or new market or new pharmacological approaches or whatever. This is part of the market, and we can change the market. We can only influence the beginning of those projects, and this is what we're doing at the moment.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think all three of those are perfect examples of they're at different stages, but they're all at the stage where they need major commercial investment. And yes, it's frustrating to see that in some cases not happening or being slow. But yeah, I don't see how I think we need to be laser focused on our role of being like this incubator of new ideas and new solutions. Because even if all those three make it to market, it might still not work for everyone, or some of them will fail, some of them will work for some people but not for others, etc. I mean, I hope I'm wrong. Maybe one of them is like the perfect silver bullet, but I think we need to stay focused on our mission of getting new ideas to be born and new solutions.
We touched on funding. Can you guys explain a little bit more about our venture capital approach to funding research?
What the approach is in general, or it's a high risk bet.
Yeah,
that it is. I mean, a venture capitalist is a mostly an investor, or it can be a fund. So just a conglomerate of different investors. And basically what they do is they try to invest at different early stages, but at an early stage, find an idea that is maybe so crazy that nobody else believes it works, and give money to those projects. And I'm not sure what the official failure rate is, but I would say if those investors have a 1 out of 500 rate, then it's amazing. That is my gut feeling. I don't know what the official rates would be in venture capital of all the things they invest, develop. I mean, that's not just medical devices or pharmacology. It can be whatever it is, whatever product is developing, or service could be also service. But yeah, so just out of my personal experience as an entrepreneur, I have to look at least 200 projects to do one. And that's not a venture capitalist.
Right.
That's
So actually us selecting one project out of 29 applications during our first grant cycle last year, we were being really strict, but actually maybe we were lucky there was even one like sort of
I think we were.
viable idea there.
I think we were. I mean, in the end, at some point during the process, I was really worried that
Me too.
I was worried, that we didn't find something. I was worried how it would affect our, our picture of Tinnitus Quest in the whole community, but in the end, I was happy that we were so strict.
Me too.
And I think I never thought that the idea of creating pitches would turn out to be in the end so efficient.
Yeah.
Because that was, I was a bit worried how that will turn out, but a lot of the pitches were so interesting, because on the one side you saw what was the application, and then you went into the pitch and it was a whole different story.
Yeah.
A whole different story.
Yeah.
And I think that was making the process very strong.
Yeah.
I think if in general research applications would be less writing and more pitching, I think a lot of things would be.
That's again where we took a kind of a business approach, and it actually saved everyone a ton of time because they didn't have to fill in long forms and stuff. But yeah, just for the audience to understand the process, like we opened up for new grant applications, and we did a lot of outreach in the research community to get as many as possible. We got 29 ideas that were submitted. That was a good number for the first time. But yeah, then we had to discard a lot of them because a lot of them were kind of like rehashing stuff that had already been tried, or maybe they just really didn't convince us that this could somehow work, right? I mean, there has to be some underlying hypothesis that's grounded in basic science where you say, yeah, I mean, that could work. So we had to discard a lot of them, but we invited 6 to pitch in a video meeting, like, okay, sell us on your idea, and we're going to ask you tons of critical questions. And yeah, there were a few that looked really good on paper, and then when you talk to them, like, they couldn't answer the most basic questions on like why this would work or whatever. And like, yeah, no, I don't think we want to fund you. And there was a moment there where we were all a bit worried that none of the ideas were good enough. And then I felt very strongly we really shouldn't. We should only fund something if we feel very good about it. But there was a legitimate concern: how would it look to the community that we have to announce that we're not funding anything? I mean, that looks so bad. Like, people are gonna lose hope and stuff. So for a moment there, it seemed like we were in a real dilemma. But then luckily, like one of the pitches like really stood out, and then we had actually a follow-up call with the researcher and one of the advisors to that project as well, to really dig in deeper and make sure we were making the right decision. And that was the Oxford project that we ended up awarding.
If you remember that, I mean, just from a venture capitalist view, this project stood out not because they had an answer to any of the critical questions, but they took those questions and implemented them into the project. I mean, that was the interesting thing about that, where the approach was very interesting. Of course, it was something that stood out, but actually they took, as you would do in a pitch. I mean, if you're smart, then you listen to what kind of questions you're getting, and you're getting a feeling what could be important, and try to implement that into your project and follow up on them. So that was, in the end, I think, very smart.
True, like there was a real receptiveness to like, we want to work with you and improve this idea together. And yeah, that really stood out as well.
Did we learn anything from that grant cycle that we can apply to the next one? And how is the next one formulated, and when are we going to start looking
Yeah,
at that?
we've already made some decisions on how the next one is gonna be slightly improved. Um, first of all, we're gonna offer a wider range in terms of grant sizes. Last year we had a $100,000 grant and a $200,000. We need a lot more flexibility there. We realized we're hoping to also attract proposals for smaller amounts, because there are certain things that you can try out that actually can be very cheap. For instance, you can do a drug repurposing study, meaning you use an existing drug that's already on the market. Maybe it's off patent, so it's very cheap. It's used for a different indication, but there's some evidence that it could work for
Or a
tinnitus.
combination. Could be
Yeah,
also
yeah,
a combination
exactly.
of drugs. Yeah.
So that's an example, but there's certain things that you can try out really kind of on the cheap. So we're hoping to get some good proposals in that category as well. We do want to probably stimulate more pharmacological proposals where we did have. I think we need all, but last year it was mostly devices and a brain stimulation. Yeah, it would be good to get more variety. Even it would be good to get even more. We did get a couple of proposals from people from other fields, and actually the project that ended up winning, the principal investigator is a Parkinson's researcher, so that's really great. The vast majority were names like they were like the usual suspects. Nothing against the usual suspects. They can all apply and come up with great ideas, but get even more people from other fields in there, get more young researchers. We're going to spend more time educating the researchers on what we want, because I think that a lot of them were still playing it safe last year because they didn't fully understand and buy into our mission. So yeah, those are all things we plan to do differently this year, and we're going to launch it quite soon. I'm aiming for April. If we can make it happen, it might get pushed to May or so, but before the summer, so that earlier in the year, so that we can get more projects going sooner rather than later.
I think this brings us to the hackathon in Wiesbaden, because when I was there, I was watching the room, I was filming, I was watching the room, and I felt like this was real sort of progress. And for me, one of the main reasons why is because we were bringing people from sort of outside the field slightly with Peter and combining them with people who are pillars in the community. And I felt that that combination of new ideas coming together with sort of the more sort of established ideas, that's where the spark started to fly for me. So I want to ask you, what were your impressions of Wiesbaden, and what did you come away thinking about?
Yeah, I had a blast in Wiesbaden. It was one day. I mean, it could have been we should have done 3 days. But it was our first time organizing something like this, and obviously a lot of effort just goes into like the practical organization of it. But when we got into the actual discussion, it was a group of like 23 people. We had some of the key tinnitus researchers there, but like you said, also researchers from other fields. We had some of the key research funders there and patient organizations, and everyone said at the end, and when we were having dinner and stuff, they all said, I've never quite been to a research meeting like this, because usually there isn't room for open discussion, debate, healthy disagreement. There was certainly disagreement, but it's really important to bring that to the front, like, okay, but what are actually the things that we disagree about? There was a very interesting moment for me where we did a quick poll in the room. How many people believe that there's one central mechanism for tinnitus? Meaning, if you can treat like intervene in that mechanism, you could solve tinnitus for everyone, regardless of what has caused it, versus how many people believe that there are meaningfully different subtypes of tinnitus that need to be treated differently. And the room was split pretty much 50-50. And so that, those are things you don't get in a traditional academic conference. I go to many of them. It's important for us to network there and tell researchers about the work we do. But I've kind of stopped going to the actual conference sessions because A, I never learn anything new. B, I don't learn anything that I couldn't read in that paper that they're presenting, because that's usually what they're doing. They're presenting a result of a study, and the paper, you can read the paper to get the same. It's to me, it's not really achieving anything new. So that's why I loved the hackathon. For me, it was great.
That was exactly the moment also that stood out for me, was this, I don't think it was even a poll. I think I can't remember correctly, but I think I asked the questions into the room.
Possibly.
Because it was that was something that interested
It was an
me.
informal poll.
Yeah, it was.
That's-
Yeah, it was. But I think what stood out was that I actually saw different groups and even one-on-ones in between, after, at dinner, whatever, wherever we were going and doing, that they started discussing ideas, they started discussing their views. Even short before, one of the researchers that is from France just actually had to leave early and catch a taxi. I think even the 5 minutes before he had to go, he was having a quite intense, almost argument about that question, actually.
Yes.
And I think this was, of course, a start. We were only able to organize that to a certain level, I mean, this was the first time we did it, and of course this was maybe not, ultra professional in every single step of it, but I think everybody, and that was the big feedback, we didn't get one bad feedback, and everybody said, we'll come again. So I think this is the most important thing, and I think this no organization in the whole field has achieved that to that moment. So, and this brought us, to how do we organize the next hackathon, or how do we want these hackathons to happen? So in the end, we ended up with the idea that we want to switch locations, to have it in the US 1 year, and in Europe swapping that around, to offer more access to the hackathon, but we still want it to be a relatively private event in relation to the big conferences. We want more people from out of the field to be invited, to just get more input. I think we're on a very, very good path to organize the next hackathon. I don't know, Hazel, what you can tell about that today, but if it's still too early. But one thing that stood out, I think, from the last hackathon, there will be a big topic in the next hackathon, and also influencing our grant cycle, or the way we do it, is that in the end, I think we all came up with the solution that we need to develop key research questions that prevent us from making the next step. And I think that is a very, very important thing to do. And one of those questions will be, for example, how can we measure tinnitus? It is one of the key research questions. So for us, the big thing would be in the future to redesign our grants more linked specifically to those questions, whatever the question will be.
Yeah, and I think it's very important that we're trying to do this with other funders, most prominently the Rainwater Charitable Foundation, whom a lot of people don't know. And we recently did a survey amongst our community. No one knows them because they very quietly become one of the main research funders. And so it's important we align where we can with other funders. Because, for instance, the objective measure thing might not be something necessarily that we fund, but someone else could fund that bit while we continue to fund the testing of new experimental treatments, right? But it's a very important piece that needs to get funded. And so the more we can sort of align the major funders to tackle all these research questions, the better. So yeah, looking forward to the next one. I'm trying to find a free venue. So if anyone knows a free venue on the US East Coast, let me know. But yeah.
Boston and New York preferred.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be wonderful when we finish editing and share this content that we've got. I think it's going to be fantastic for people to get an insight, because I think for many people it might be the first real insight they get to the world of tinnitus research. And I think that the more we show them, the more involved they get, the more agency they have and feel more sort of involved with the whole thing. So for me, it was an amazing experience to be in the room with people I've been reading about for a long time. But I also came away with the feeling that we got to work. We got to work. There's a lot. There's a lot we need to do. So we're really focused on transparency. Can you walk through some of the actions we've taken to be as transparent as we possibly can be?
Yeah. So we've thought a lot about how we allocate funding. I think that is probably the key thing that people think about when they think about transparency. I mean, there's how decisions are made. I think we've been very transparent about how our whole grant process has worked, giving you like behind the scenes look at how decisions are made. But I think funding is probably top of the list when people think about transparency. And so I think when we started Tinnitus Quest, we were maybe a little bit naive in thinking we were just going to raise money and put it all into research, which is great in theory. It doesn't work like that when you want to run a professional organization, right? And so one thing we soon realized is that, of course, an organization has all kinds of running costs, but also you need to spend money to fundraise, right? That's the tricky thing. So we've put a lot of effort into our social media. So you have the production costs of all of that. Even if you're running mostly on volunteer time, there's production costs. And the reality is you have to put money into social media ads to get that social media engine started. And even when you already have a significant amount of followers, you need to keep putting ad money in from time to time. That's just the reality of how that system works, right? So it's not realistic to think we can put everything into research. What we want to do is be very transparent about our funding streams and where the money goes. We're going to release soon an annual report, our first annual report covering 2025 and maybe also that bit of 2024 when we just got started. So our first roughly 18 months, let's say. And what we've also now decided, which I think is very important, is we have different funding streams, right? We have money coming in from the website. People donate money on the website. It's like 20 euros or dollars, 50, 100, it's amounts like that. Those amounts really add up. I mean, I think in our first 18 months, the total of all of that added up to about $100,000. So that's that could be a complete research grant by itself. And so we decided all that money donated through the website should go fully to research, because people want to know when they make a donation on the website and putting their hard-earned money to an organization that, they know us a little bit, maybe they trust us, maybe they're on the fence, whatever. It feels good to know that money is going 100% to research. So we have our research fund. All the donations from the website flow into the research fund. And then we raise funding from high net worth people, basically. And that's a lot of what I'm doing, is having discussions with high net worth people and trying to get them to donate. And those donations are earmarked. So I'll give you an example. last year I lost my job at a big corporate where I was collateral damage because they, a lot of companies are downsizing these days. And I realized I would like to work full time for Tinnitus Quest. I went out and fundraised my own salary. So I went specifically to several donors and said, look, I'm asking you to fund my work and value the contribution that I'm bringing to this field and this organization. So they know exactly where that money is going and they're funding the impact that they think I can have on the field and the value that I can bring, right? And other donors might say, no, I want that money to go fully into research, and then it goes fully into research. So in the end, it's about being very transparent and open about where the money goes, but being also very realistic that it takes money to run an organization. And that's the reality of it. It's not realistic to think that you can just run what I think is a very professional organization and has become in a very short time. You can't just do that on a shoestring, I don't think. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that setup really is essential. It's essential that it's transparently communicated, but also, like you say, if we want a professional setup representing the tinnitus community, I feel like it has to be that way.
Yeah, I mean, it was a perfect answer, Hazel. I actually have nothing to add to that. Only saying that, there is no development without initial investment. It doesn't exist. And I think, as Hazel described it, the first 18 months were crucial to that tinnitus is considered a success or a failure. That was the first 18 months. And I think we've come to the point where we can say, okay, this first success was that we established Tinnitus Quest as one of the strong voices for tinnitus in the world. And now, of course, we start it's like developing or starting a company. It's the same thing. It really, there's not a lot of differences to it. In the beginning, what you try to do is you do the work of 10 with 2. This is what you do in the beginning because you have no funds, you have no money to do that. So, and then you're getting success part by part, and you have to be very careful on how you spend your money on what and how to progress. And then you come to the point where you have established your let's say your home ground. And now the question is, what are we doing next? And especially this will influence us, I think, a lot over the next 24 to 36 months is, we haven't been at the moment very active in Asia because we just didn't have the people to do it. So we haven't been super active in South America and so on and so forth. So all those questions will arise, and we will try to find a solution for that, step by step, without never forgetting for what we're there is to collect money for research and actually get into that. But that needs a foundation.
Yeah, I think it is. You have to invest. It's just like like you said, it's like a startup company. It's the same. You have to invest in the beginning to get things started, and it's not. People are not going to donate to an organization they don't know, right? So you have to first establish yourself as a trusted brand before you can get the donations. And I think we're now reaching the point where it's becoming easier. In my fundraising conversations, I'm definitely noticing that it is becoming easier. But fundraising is never easy, and fundraising for a cause like tinnitus is always going to be challenging. And I think the key factor for our success in the coming years is going to be how much money can we raise, and that's the reality of it. And I would like to get us within the next 2-3 years to a situation where we're raising $1 million per year. I think that is a level where we can sort of comfortably cover our costs and put in a lot of money to research and have a real impact in the way that we want to have an impact. And for me, that's like the key performance indicator for the next 2-3 years is, can we get the fundraising to that level? And the honest answer is, I don't know yet, but I'm going to put in everything I can. And that's what I'm literally doing every day.
I just want to make a final comment from my point of view. I think for me, when I hear these conversations that we're having, a lot of it comes back to what I feel is the central tenet, certainly is from my work, and that is engagement and motivation and enthusiasm and energy from the tinnitus community. I said it right from the start. I think the first podcast that we did, I said that if 1% of the community that has severe tinnitus, not the total, but the severe community, was to donate the price of one coffee, we could already start to raise 12 million. So I think it comes back to the tinnitus community themselves. And I would like to suggest these things to anyone listening. And if you've listened this far to us three babbling on for an hour and a half, then I would think that tinnitus is probably a problem in your life. So if that's the case, what I would really like you to embrace is, number one, it starts with you. Make your voice count. Register with your tinnitus association. If you don't have one, all you need is a Facebook page. Start one. Engage or register with us. Number two, understand what we're saying is that donations are the key. So if you can afford $5, $10, whatever you can afford, but whether we like it or not, if donations don't come, there's no research. And if there's no research, there's no progress. We're going to be here for another 20, 30 years. It comes down to donations. I'd also like to encourage people to share your story. Your story counts as much as anyone. You might say, well, I'm not going to reach anyone. Who's going to be interested in my story? It's stories that people are interested in. We've got to put a face on tinnitus. And number four, if Tinnitus Quest is something that you believe in, then stand up for what you believe. Help us. When you go on our social media and you see comments that we get all the time, we're a scam, we're this and we're that, this is just, there's no cure, there's never going to be a cure. If you see those comments, don't just scroll past them. If Tinnitus Quest is something that you resonate with and you believe and trust, then don't just scroll past those comments. Reply. Stand up for what you believe in, because it's about community. We keep saying tinnitus community, and that's what it's about. Because if we get more people, I think there's no stopping us if we get the numbers.
People might not realize how much they can actually help with simple, small actions like what you mentioned, like responding to comments from other people on our social media content. That's such a simple way to help out that would literally cost you a few minutes per week or whatever. And that honestly really helps out, because even just responding to all the social media comments we get, if we all have to do it ourselves, just takes time away from other tasks like fundraising or running our grants program or whatever it is. So yeah, even with small things, you can really help out. If you can't afford to donate, there's lots of other things you can do. And like you said, sharing your story. If you feel comfortable with that, we understand it's not everyone's thing, right? But it can really help. And if you want to be a volunteer, reach out, info@tinnitusquest.com, and we'll have a conversation and see how you can help out.